Hello, I'm Edward Hale, and welcome to The Real Cary Grant on September 18, 1982, for days after the tragic death of Princess Grace Kelly in a car accident on the winding roads of Monaco. The Cathedral of Saint Nicholas was filled with European royalty, world dignitaries, and Hollywood stars gathered for one of the most watched state funerals of the decade. Among the over 400 mourners was Cary Grant, now 78 years old, who had flown from California as soon as he learned of Grace's death, devastated by the loss of the woman he had loved 3 decades earlier during the filming of To Catch a Thief. Grant was offered a place of honor near the front of the cathedral, but he refused, choosing instead to sit quietly in the back, weeping throughout the televised service as the world said goodbye to the princess who had once been Hollywood's brightest star. What happened after the public ceremony, when Grant was given a private moment to say his final farewell, revealed the depth of a love that had never died and a regret that would haunt him until his own death 4 years later. On the morning of September 14, 1982, Cary Grant was at his Beverly Hills home when he received the phone call he had secretly dreaded for decades. A close friend called to inform him that Grace Kelly had died from injuries sustained in a car crash in Monaco. Grace had suffered a stroke while driving with her 17-year-old daughter, Princess Stephanie, in the passenger seat. The car had plunged down a 45-meter embankment. Stephanie survived with minor injuries, but Grace's head trauma was catastrophic. She died the following day at Princess Grace Hospital, the medical center that bore her own name. Grant was completely paralyzed by the news. His wife, Barbara Harris Grant, found him sitting motionless in their living room, tears streaming silently down his face, unable to speak. When he finally found words, Grant said something that shocked Barbara. "I should have saved her." Barbara knew about Grant's past relationship with Grace, but she did not fully understand the depth of what he had felt or the weight of the regret he carried. Grant spent the next several hours alone in his study, refusing to see anyone, processing the loss of the woman he had loved more deeply than any other in his life. Friends who spoke with Grant in those days said he seemed to have aged a decade overnight, the weight of grief finally breaking the composure he had maintained for so many years. Grant made an immediate decision. He would fly to Monaco for the funeral, no matter how painful it would be to see Grace one final time. He and Barbara boarded a plane to Europe, Grant spending most of the flight staring out the window in silence, lost in memories of the summer of 1955 when he and Grace had filmed To Catch a Thief on the French Riviera and fallen in love. Grant thought about the conversations they had shared, the laughter, the promises about futures they both knew were impossible. He remembered the final conversation in New York in early 1956, just weeks before Grace's wedding to Prince Rainier, when Grant had begged her not to go through with the marriage, when he had offered to divorce his wife and face any scandal to be with her. He remembered Grace's refusal, her insistence that duty came before love, her choice of a crown over her heart. Grant had spent 26 years wondering if he could have said or done something different, something that would have convinced Grace to choose a life with him instead of the gilded cage of Monaco. Now she was gone, and he would never have the chance to know. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on love and regret. And make sure you're subscribed to The Real Cary Grant. When Grant arrived in Monaco, he spent time alone driving through the city, past the locations where he and Grace had filmed To Catch a Thief decades earlier. The roads where they had laughed together were now the roads where she had died. The coincidence felt cruel and inevitable, as if Grace's fate had always been tied to this place where their love story had begun and where her life had ended. Grant visited the site of the accident, standing at the edge of the road looking down the steep embankment, trying to understand how it had happened, how the vibrant woman he had loved could be gone so suddenly and senselessly. The day before the funeral, Grant received an unexpected invitation for a private meeting with Prince Rainier at the palace. The encounter between the two men who had loved Grace in such fundamentally different ways was tense and emotionally charged. Rainier, devastated by the loss of his wife of 26 years, but also aware of the long-standing rumors about Grace's past relationship with Grant, was visibly uncomfortable. Grant, for the first time face-to-face with the man Grace had chosen over him, struggled to maintain his composure. Rainier thanked Grant for coming and acknowledged that Grace had always spoken fondly of working with him on To Catch a Thief. Then he said something surprising. She kept photographs from that film in her private chambers. She looked at them when she was sad. Grant was visibly moved, realizing that Grace had spent 26 years looking at reminders of the summer they had shared together, remembering what could have been. Rainier, perhaps in a moment of brutal honesty brought on by grief, admitted something more. Grace was never completely happy here. She tried. She fulfilled her duty. But part of her was always somewhere else. The two men looked at each other with painful understanding. They both knew where that part of Grace had been with Cary Grant in the summer of 1955, before duty and expectations destroyed the possibility of genuine happiness. On September 18, 1982, the Cathedral of Saint Nicholas in Monaco was packed with 400 official guests, while 100 million people watched around the world on television. First Lady Nancy Reagan represented the United States. European royalty filled the front pews. Hollywood legends, including Frank Sinatra's wife Barbara, attended to pay their respects. The cathedral where Grace had married Prince Rainier 26 years earlier now served as the setting for her funeral. Grace's body had lain in state in the Palatine Chapel at the Prince's Palace, where 26,000 people had filed past to pay their respects. She was dressed in a high-necked white lace dress and surrounded by orchids. The funeral procession from the palace to the cathedral was led by Prince Rainier with Prince Albert and Princess Caroline. Princess Stephanie, still recovering from injuries sustained in the crash, was unable to attend. Her absence was a painful reminder of the tragedy that had taken Grace's life. Cary Grant was offered a place of honor near the front of the cathedral, recognizing his importance in Grace's life, but he refused. He chose to sit discreetly in the back among less prominent mourners. Friends said Grant did not want to make Grace's funeral about himself, did not want his presence to become a distraction or fuel for gossip about their past relationship. During the Requiem Mass, Grant remained completely still, his gaze fixed on Grace's flag-draped coffin at the front of the cathedral. Tears streamed silently down his face throughout the entire service, but he never made a sound or drew attention to himself. Fellow Hollywood legend Jimmy Stewart delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about Grace's beauty, talent, and kindness. When Grace's children Prince Albert and Princess Caroline approached the altar to read tributes to their mother, Grant closed his eyes, thinking about the life Grace could have lived, the children she and he might have had together, the love they had both sacrificed for expectations and appearances. Make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next reveals the true depth of Grant's love for Grace. After the public ceremony concluded and most mourners departed, Grant remained in the cathedral. Prince Rainier had granted him something extraordinary, a private moment to say goodbye to Grace before her burial in the Grimaldi family vault. This was an unusual honor, typically reserved only for immediate family, but Rainier understood that Grant had meant something special to Grace, that their connection deserved acknowledgement even if it had never been publicly discussed. In a small private chapel, Grace's coffin was opened one final time. Only Rainier and Grace's children Prince Albert and Princess Caroline were present as witnesses. Grant approached the coffin slowly, visibly struggling to maintain composure as he saw Grace for the last time. She looked peaceful, her hands folded over her chest as if she were merely sleeping. Grant stood beside the coffin for a long moment, 30 years of memories flooding through him, Grace laughing on the Riviera during To Catch a Thief, Grace touching his face with tenderness, Grace saying she loved him but could not stay with him, Grace choosing a crown over her heart. Then Grant reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small white envelope. Inside was a photograph, yellowed with age. Grant and Grace together on the set of To Catch a Thief in 1955, looking at each other with love so obvious that no one who saw that photo could deny what had existed between them. Grant had kept this photograph in his private study for 27 years, looking at it whenever he thought about Grace and the life they might have shared. Grant placed the photograph gently in Grace's hands, folding her fingers delicately around it. Then he leaned close and whispered something that only Prince Rainier, standing nearby, could hear. "You chose wrong, my love. We both chose wrong. Forgive me for not fighting harder." Rainier, witnessing this moment of raw grief and final honesty, began to cry. Carolyn and Albert, not fully understanding the significance but feeling the emotional weight, also wept. Grant stood there for another moment, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the coffin, saying a silent goodbye to the only woman he had ever truly loved. Then he turned and walked out, never returning to Monaco again. The gesture of placing that photograph in Grace's hands was Grant's way of ensuring that she would be buried with a reminder of when she had been truly happy, when she had been free to be herself before duty and royal protocol consumed her life. It was also Grant's acknowledgement of their shared mistake, his admission that he should have fought harder to keep her, that he should not have encouraged her to marry Rainier when he knew she would be miserable. Those present in that private chapel said the moment was one of the most emotionally powerful they had ever witnessed. Rainier later told close friends that he finally understood the depth of what Grace and Grant had shared, that their love had been real and profound, and that Grace had carried it with her throughout her 26 years as Princess of Monaco. The photograph Grant placed in her hands remained there when Grace was buried in the Grimaldi family vault beneath the cathedral, a secret symbol of the love she never fully abandoned. Cary Grant left Monaco immediately after the funeral and never spoke publicly about what he had done or what he had said to Grace in that final moment. Friends said he became more withdrawn after Grace's death, the weight of regret and loss aging him rapidly. Grant had always been a private person, but after losing Grace, he seemed to retreat even further into himself. He spent more time with his daughter Jennifer, perhaps recognizing how precious time with loved ones truly was, perhaps trying to find meaning in fatherhood since his romantic life had been marked by so much loss and disappointment. For years later, in November 1986, Cary Grant died of a stroke at age 82 while preparing to attend a theater performance in Iowa. He was still married to Barbara Harris, who had been a devoted and loving wife during his final years. But those closest to Grant said he never fully recovered from losing Grace, that her death had broken something in him that could not be repaired. Grant died carrying the same regret he had whispered over Grace's coffin, that they had both chosen wrong, that they had let duty and fear of scandal destroy the possibility of genuine happiness together. The story of Cary Grant placing that photograph in Grace Kelly's hands reveals the tragedy of a love that never died despite being abandoned, of choices made for all the wrong reasons that haunted to people for the rest of their lives. Grant and Grace had the chance for real happiness together in 1956, but they let it slip away because they were too afraid of what others would think, too committed to maintaining perfect public images, too willing to sacrifice authentic love for respectable appearances. For 26 years, Grace lived in a palace but felt trapped. For those same 26 years, Grant went through for more marriages, searching for what he had lost when he let Grace go. Both of them spent decades looking back at the summer of 1955, at that brief moment when they were truly happy together, at the choice they made to walk away from each other. And both of them died with that regret, Grant's final words to Grace acknowledging what they both knew but had never fully admitted: they had chosen wrong, and that wrong choice had cost them everything that mattered. What do you think about sacrificing true love for duty and appearances? Could Grant and Grace have found happiness together if they had been brave enough to choose each other over their reputations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to The Real Cary Grant for more stories about the man whose love was so deep that it transcended even death. Next time, we will explore another chapter in Cary Grant's extraordinary life that reveals even more about his character and the profound connections he formed with the remarkable people of Hollywood's golden age.